The Denver sky was a washed canvas of gray, with the kind of low-hanging clouds that made even the most experienced pilots double-check their instruments. Inside Delta Flight 742, the cabin buzzed with the usual mix of chatter, coughing, and the soft hum of overhead bins being slammed shut. Yet amidst the predictable chaos, one passenger was conspicuously still. She sat alone in seat 16C, a window seat halfway back, tucked beneath a faded blue hoodie, the hood drawn low to shield her face. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, fingers intertwined, betraying none of the nervous tension that would have betrayed anyone else. Her posture was rigid yet calm, like a soldier who had been trained to move through danger without reacting to it. No one knew her name. On the boarding pass that sat flat against the seat tray, it read Margaret Hale. To the world outside this narrow fuselage, she was just another traveler headed somewhere she didn't care to announce. But inside, her mind was already running a checklist that had nothing to do with vacation plans or family reunions. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, exchanging polite greetings with passengers and securing the cabin for takeoff. Maggie's eyes followed them with mild interest but didn't linger. Instead, she observed the engine intakes, the subtle flex of the wings as the plane taxied, and the way the turbulence outside hinted at shifting wind currents. To anyone else, it would have looked like nervous anticipation. To her, it was pure information, absorbed silently and efficiently. Minutes before takeoff, the flight attendant approached her. "Ma'am, could you, please lower your hood for a moment?" Maggie hesitated, lifting her chin just enough to reveal a face that had seen more skis than anyone in the cabin could imagine. The lines around her eyes were faint but firm, etched by countless hours of focus, tension, and long nights spent in airbases across the globe. Her expression was calm but unyielding, the kind of serenity that makes people uncomfortable because it feels like it belongs to someone entirely in control of situations far beyond their experience. "Thank you," the attendant said, offering a polite smile before moving on. No one knew what they had just seen. A quiet, middle-aged woman, barely noticeable. Yet her presence radiated a subtle tension, a charge in the air that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. As the plane roared down the runway, the familiar vibrations traveling through the fuselage didn't disturb her. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon outside, scanning the clouds as though reading a coded message in their shapes. The other passengers were bouncing in their seats, clutching armrests, phones out, streaming live reactions to the shaky ascent. Maggie, on the other hand, remained unnervingly still, her calmness almost alien in the middle of the cabin chaos. Then the turbulence began. Not the normal kind you shrug off, but a violent shaking that jolted the plane side to side. Gasps rippled through the cabin, drinks spilled. A mother clutched her child and whispered hurried reassurances that she didn't believe herself. Maggie's knuckles whitened slightly as she gripped the armrest, but instead of fear, her eyes narrowed. She was listening, not to the shaking of the plane or the muffled screams, but to the tone of the engines. The subtle pitch differences, the vibration through the fuselage, the way the turbulence interacted with lift, it all told her exactly what the plane was experiencing. A crew member glanced her way, curiosity overtaking protocol. Why is she just sitting there, eyes scanning the clouds like she's reading some hidden code in the sky? Minutes later, something unexpected happened. The cockpit radio crackled, not with standard flight chatter, but with a frequency reserved for unusual military traffic. The captain, experienced and composed, leaned forward trying to clarify the call, but the signal was brief, sharp, and tense. Maggie's lips moved almost imperceptibly. "Eagle Air pattern, that's wrong," she whispered under her breath. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning, delivered quietly, almost as if the plane itself could understand her concern. No one heard her, no one except herself. Yet the color drained from her face, and her calm exterior betrayed the first hint of tension. Her breath hitched ever so slightly, just enough to hint that the information she had just detected carried weight, immense weight. As the plane leveled off at 35,000 feet, Maggie continued her silent scan of the instruments, the engine hums, the patterns of clouds, and the shadow of the mountains far below. Then she noticed it, a flicker in the corner of her vision, almost imperceptible. Outside the left window, high above the clouds, two shapes tore across the sky with a speed and precision that no commercial plane should ever encounter. F-22 Raptors, cutting across their airspace with deadly elegance. Passengers noticed them only when the aircraft tilted slightly under their sudden presence. Phones appeared, cameras out, and screams erupted from all corners of the cabin. The captain's voice came over the intercom, tight and controlled but betraying his unease. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unscheduled military intercept. Please remain calm." The word intercept made Maggie's stomach tighten, not out of fear but recognition. These pilots weren't here for routine patrol. They were searching for something or someone. A flight attendant tried to block her as she stood. "Ma'am, please stay seated." Maggie ignored her, moving to the front of the cabin with a stride that was confident and precise, as if she had done this countless times before. She stopped beside the cockpit door, leaning slightly to peer through the small glass window. Her lips moved, whispering a sequence of numbers and letters, coordinates, flight patterns, engine specs. The pilots outside responded immediately. One of the Raptors rolled its wing, a maneuver that was not aggressive but coded. It was a signal only one person could recognize, the recognition of Eagle One. Maggie froze, her breath caught. The call sign was decades old, retired officially, buried in classified files. She hadn't used it in years, and yet here it was, spoken across military radios and confirmed by maneuvers that screamed recognition. Then the unthinkable happened. A radio voice, clipped and tense, broke protocol, cutting through the static. "Confirm if Eagle One is aboard." Time seemed to stop inside the cabin. Passengers craned their necks to look at the cockpit, sensing the sudden spike in tension, but unable to understand the depth of what was happening. Maggie's hands trembled imperceptibly. She had trained herself for decades to remain calm under fire, to make split-second decisions with lives hanging in the balance, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Being hunted in plain sight, on a commercial flight, by pilots who once followed her lead into war zones. The flight attendant looked at her in confusion and concern. "Ma'am, what does that mean?" Maggie turned slowly, lips barely moving. "It means they remember me," she said, almost to herself. Her voice was calm, but the shadow in her eyes told a story that no one could read without fear. Outside, the F-22s adjusted formation, no longer aggressive, now scanning and protecting. Their movements were sharp, precise, and terrifyingly beautiful. Every tilt of a wing, every flash of sunlight off their fuselage, carried decades of history that Maggie had hoped no one would ever call her back into. And as the plane climbed above a layer of clouds, passengers caught glimpses of her face for the first time. A woman who seemed ordinary, almost forgettable, yet radiating a presence that made even seasoned travelers uneasy. Someone who had been silent for years, but whose story was about to unravel in ways no one aboard could imagine. Because in the next few minutes, the quiet civilian passenger would become the center of a military storm, the eye of a long-forgotten legacy, and the link between the ordinary world below and the extraordinary skies above. And Maggie Hale, known in her past as Eagle One, sat still, staring out the window, knowing that her life and the lives of everyone on this plane was about to change forever. The plane had barely leveled when the first shadow appeared outside the left window. Maggie's gaze locked on the sky, calculating speed, altitude, and trajectory almost instinctively. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. This was no ordinary encounter. It was a reconnaissance, an evaluation. Two F-22 Raptors tore across the horizon, moving faster than any civilian plane could register. Their angular silhouettes glinted in the sunlight like predatory birds against the gray canvas of clouds. The passengers screamed, some standing, some pressed flat against their seats, phones capturing every terrifying second. The cabin vibrated with tension, the low hum of the engines suddenly feeling fragile beneath the might of these jets. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain announced, his voice unsteady for the first time, "we are being escorted by military aircraft. Please remain calm." Maggie didn't respond. She already knew the escort wasn't routine. These weren't standard patrol maneuvers. They were looking for something or someone specific. And the way they were moving, precise, almost ceremonial, told her everything. They were searching for Eagle One. A young flight attendant tried to intercept her as she rose from her seat. "Ma'am, please sit down. You're scaring the passengers." Maggie turned, her eyes calm yet blazing with unspoken authority. "I need to speak to the captain," she said. Her voice, low and steady, carried a weight that silenced the cabin for a brief, impossible moment. Even the frightened passengers froze, sensing she was no ordinary civilian. The captain looked at her, confusion etched across his face. "Do you know what's happening?" "Yes," Maggie said, stepping into the aisle with measured precision. "They're not escorting us. They're searching for me." The words seemed absurd to the crew. A civilian, hunted by F-22s. Yet her tone brooked no argument. Something in her posture, the precise calculation in her eyes, told them she wasn't bluffing. Outside, one of the Raptors rolled its wing, a subtle but unmistakable signal. Maggie's eyes widened slightly. Recognition. Respect. A greeting that only one person aboard could interpret. Her heart rate didn't spike, but her mind raced through protocols, contingencies, and decades-old tactics buried in classified files. The cabin remained oblivious to the import of the gesture. All they saw were two supersonic machines moving impossibly close, wings tilted sharply, each movement smooth and deliberate. The roar outside was deafening, a low, rolling thunder that seemed to shake the entire plane. Then a voice crackled over the radio, cutting through the static like a blade. "Confirm if Eagle One is aboard." Time froze. Maggie's hand went to her chest instinctively. Her past had been classified, erased in official records, but some knew her still. And now they were asking the question that had haunted her for over a decade. "Yes," she said softly, almost to herself. Then louder, steadying her voice, she commanded, "Tell them yes." The captain's eyes widened. "Do you have any idea what that call sign means?" She nodded, her jaw tight. "I retired with it. They shouldn't be here, but they are." Outside, the Raptors shifted formation. What had been threatening now became protective. They moved in a perfect formation alongside the plane, scanning, observing, shielding. The cabin felt a surreal mix of terror and awe, but no one understood why. One of the passengers, a young Air Force lieutenant on leave, whispered almost to himself, "Eagle One was declared missing in 2009. Maggie's gaze flicked to him, calm, unreadable. She didn't respond. The plane continued to climb through thin clouds, leaving the Denver skyline behind, but the shadows of the Raptors stayed, a living reminder of her past. Inside, passengers whispered theories, military exercise, prank, misunderstanding. No one suspected the truth. The F-22s were here for her, and they were deadly serious. She walked to the cockpit, leaning slightly against the door. "Engine checks," she murmured, almost mechanically, as her eyes scanned the readouts she didn't even have clearance to see. "Throttle response is nominal, but turbulence could be exploited if we're not careful." The captain blinked. "How do you know this?" Maggie's lips pressed together. A fraction of a smile flickered and vanished. "Because I've flown faster, higher, and more dangerous than anything on this plane could ever manage, and I've survived." The cockpit radio crackled again. "Eagle One, maintain formation. We need your eyes. Critical assessment required." Maggie froze for a heartbeat. Her hands tightened into fists at her sides. She hadn't flown in years, not officially, not under this call sign. The last time she had taken to the skis in combat conditions, lives hung in her hands, and one wrong decision could have ended dozens of careers. And now, the responsibility had returned in the form of a civilian flight, a passenger cabin filled with innocents, and two F-22 pilots who trusted her judgment over the captain. The plane shuddered as the turbulence intensified. Drinks sloshed over the edges of cups. Children whimpered. Phones rattled on trays. Maggie stepped closer to the cockpit door, placing a hand against the small glass. Her mind raced. They're not just searching, they're testing. Seeing if I still have the instincts, the judgment, the edge, if I can still be Eagle One. Then came the subtle flicker in the left wingtip, an almost imperceptible signal from the lead F-22. A challenge, a question, a test only she could answer. Without hesitation, Maggie leaned close to the radio, whispering, "Throttle adjustments minor. Avoid turbulence-induced yaw. They're scanning us. Don't give them a reason." The captain turned to her, bewildered. "They're scanning us. What do you mean?" "They're watching me," she said, calm but intense. Her eyes scanned the instruments again, reading patterns no civilian was supposed to read. "They'll know if I make a mistake." Suddenly, the plane pitched sharply as the turbulence worsened. Maggie's body shifted instinctively, almost as if she were connected to the plane's every movement. Passengers screamed, some vomiting, some praying. Yet she remained a fixed point of control, exuding a calm that seemed impossible in the chaos. The Raptors outside adjusted as well, forming a protective pattern around the plane. Maggie noted the minor oscillations, the timing of their engine thrusts, the subtle rotations of their fuselage. Each signal was a language she had once spoken fluently, a language of life and death, strategy and precision. One passenger tried to open the emergency exit for reasons unknown. Maggie intercepted him with a firm grip and a look that froze him in place. "Sit down," she said. "Now." He obeyed instantly. The cabin watched in silent confusion as this quiet woman moved with authority no ordinary person could command. She was not a flight attendant, not military, at least officially, not a hero. Yet everyone instinctively obeyed. Another radio message cut through the roar outside. "Eagle One, your assessment is required. Identify risk levels and maintain civilian safety." Maggie exhaled slowly, scanning her internal checklist. Thrusters stable, engine balance acceptable, minor turbulence avoidable, cabin safe for short-term exposure. She leaned toward the cockpit. "They're within standard intercept distance. They will not engage unless provoked. Passengers remain secure. No sudden maneuvers." The captain nodded, dumbfounded. How do you know that?" Maggie's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because I've been in worse, much worse, and I survived." Outside, the Raptors dipped and flanked, almost dancing around the commercial plane with precision and purpose. The passengers stared in awe, terror, and confusion. Cameras recorded the impossible sight. Two fighter jets moving in synchronized perfection, one civilian at the center of the unfolding drama, and a woman whose past had just re-entered the world like a ghost from the clouds. Maggie sank back into her seat for a moment, scanning the cabin. Fearful eyes met hers, but she offered no comfort, only presence. The moment was too delicate. One wrong move, one hesitation, and lives could be lost. And these pilots, the ones calling her Eagle One, trusted her implicitly. The final words over the radio, before the Raptors began a looser orbit, sent a chill down her spine. "Eagle One, welcome back. Let's see if you still remember how to lead." And in that instant, Maggie Hale realized that nothing in her life had been as dangerous or as exhilarating as the quiet hours she had just survived on this commercial flight. The plane continued its climb, and the world below remained blissfully unaware. But above the clouds, in the thin blue air of authority, history, and skill, a civilian had become a legend again, whether she was ready or not. The cabin had descended into a tense silence, broken only by the low hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of the F-22 radio. Passengers were frozen mid-sentence, phones dangling in hands, mouths slightly open, trying to reconcile the surreal sight outside their windows with the woman quietly sitting in seat 16C. Maggie Hale adjusted her hoodie, letting the light catch her eyes. The gray in her irises was faint, but the sharpness, the calculation behind them was unmistakable. These eyes had scanned battlefields, enemy formations, and tactical anomalies that no civilian could ever imagine. Yet now, they were just observing her own small plane, the occupants unaware that their lives depended on her memory and instincts. The radio crackled again. Eagle One, confirm your readiness to provide tactical oversight. Her lips pressed together. She had not heard that call sign in years, and the sound of it carried weight heavier than any aircraft she had flown. Memories surfaced instantly, unbidden. High-speed intercepts, classified missions deep behind enemy lines, pilots depending on her split-second decisions to survive. And then the mission that ended it all, the one that made her disappear from the military's records. "Yes," she said finally, her voice calm, measured, but carrying the authority it once commanded. "I am ready." The captain, still pale and confused, turned toward her. "Do you realize what you're saying? Those jets, those pilots, they know you. Your call sign, they've built entire protocols around it. They've trained, coordinated, and prepared for someone who has been officially erased." Maggie's gaze softened briefly, but only enough for a flicker of vulnerability. "They don't need me in the system. They need me in the sky, and the sky doesn't forget." Outside, the Raptors adjusted formation again. The lead jet dipped slightly, engines humming in a rhythmic, calculated way. Maggie leaned toward the cockpit window, watching, listening. She could read the intentions of the pilots with a precision she hadn't used in years. A passenger whispered to another, voice trembling, Who is she? Why are they calling her Eagle One?" Another, a young man with a tablet, said, "I think she's some kind of ex-military. But that doesn't make sense, she's just a woman, right?" Maggie's lips curved slightly, not in amusement, but in recognition of the absurdity of it all. From the outside, she looked ordinary. Yet in these skis, in these precise, deadly movements of the Raptors, she was extraordinary. The radio crackled again, this time with more intensity. "Eagle One, situation updated. Multiple anomalies detected in civilian airspace. Your tactical input is requested immediately." Maggie's hands went to her lap, clasping and unclasping, fingers trembling ever so slightly. She had trained for these moments for decades, yet the stakes had shifted. Not a military sortie, not a controlled mission. This was a civilian plane with innocents on board, and the F-22 pilots trusted her judgment implicitly. She spoke, voice calm, precise. "Engage visual contact with the larger aircraft to our south. Maintain altitude at 35,000 feet. Avoid aggressive maneuvers until clearance. They are scanning us, testing for reaction. Do not provoke engagement." The cockpit went silent for a heartbeat. The captain, unsure how to respond, merely nodded. Maggie could sense his hesitation, his fear that this situation was beyond comprehension. And in a sense, it was. Only she understood the language of the air, the silent communications of the Raptors, and the weight of her own past. "Eagle One," the lead F-22 pilot spoke, a voice calm but filled with reverence. "Do you understand the significance of your call sign here?" Maggie's eyes hardened. She knew exactly what it meant. Decades of history, missions classified, successes and losses that no one outside a select few had ever acknowledged. She remembered the night she had first earned the title, how it had been whispered in halls of secrecy, in flight simulators, in classrooms with pilots who didn't yet understand how she had rewritten the rules of engagement. "Do I understand?" she said, her voice low, almost dangerous. "I live it every day." A subtle nod from the F-22 confirmed her assessment. The pilots respected her authority, even now, decades later. They trusted her instincts over any modern protocols because she had once saved them. Many had followed her commands into situations that would have killed ordinary pilots, and she had survived, barely. Maggie's mind wandered briefly to that last mission, classified and unspoken. A strike group trapped behind enemy lines, resources dwindling, options exhausted. She had taken the controls herself, guiding every maneuver, every evasion, every high-speed intercept. The mission had been a success, lives saved. But the cost had been steep. She had vanished from official records, discharged as a civilian, a ghost with a legend attached. Eagle 1, we are maintaining your recommended altitude and approach vectors, the pilot confirmed over the radio. Further assessment required. Civilian safety remains paramount. Maggie exhaled briefly and closed her eyes. She was back where she had always belonged, in the sky, amidst precision, calculation, and responsibility. But this time, the stakes were different. Not just her own survival, not just a military mission. The lives of hundreds of innocent civilians rested in her hands. A young flight attendant passed by her row, glancing at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Ma'am, what are you doing?" Maggie didn't answer. She only watched the horizon, eyes scanning, measuring, calculating. A small flicker of unease touched her stomach. It wasn't fear. She had long ago left fear behind, but a recognition that the past she thought buried was catching up. Passengers craned their necks, catching glimpses of the Raptors outside. Cameras clicked and flashed, but Maggie's mind was on every nuance. Angles of attack, distances, relative velocities. These were calculations no ordinary person could make, yet she performed them effortlessly, mentally tracing every possible scenario in milliseconds. Eagle 1 confirmed civilian cabin readiness, the lead pilot asked over the radio, and Maggie realized just how completely she was in control. Not officially, not in title, not in authority, but in skill, instinct, and experience. The cabin is stable, passengers secure. Minor turbulence, exploitable only with aggressive maneuvers which are not recommended, she replied. Outside, the Raptors shifted, engines roaring with power restrained by a precision only she could anticipate. The lead pilot executed a slow, deliberate roll, a salute, a sign of acknowledgement, a gesture that was ceremonial, respectful, and terrifying all at once. Passengers gasped, some cheering quietly, some frozen in disbelief. They had no idea why this silent, unassuming woman had commanded the respect of the most advanced fighter jets in the world. The young lieutenant whispered to the man beside him, voice trembling, I think she's the real Eagle 1. The legend, the simulations, the declassified files, she's real." Maggie's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly. Yes, she thought, I am, but that life is gone, or is it? The radio crackled again. Eagle 1, tactical assessment required. Recommend continued civilian escort until descending into controlled airspace. Maggie nodded to herself. Understood, she replied. Her hands went to the armrests, fingers flexing, ready to guide, to correct, to command if necessary. For a fleeting moment, the surreal reality struck her. Decades of silence erased records, a civilian life carefully constructed, all colliding in this single, tense hour at 35,000 feet. And yet she was not afraid. She was alive, present, and in control, more than anyone aboard the plane could ever comprehend. The Raptors maintained formation, their presence a silent testament to the past and a harbinger of what was to come. And Maggie Hale, known once and forever as Eagle 1, realized that the world she had left behind had never stopped remembering her. Because even as the passengers whispered in awe, even as cameras captured a moment they would never forget, Maggie knew. Her story was no longer hers alone. The legend had returned, and the skis were about to test her once more. As the plane cruised through a layer of cloud, the cabin seemed to exist in two different worlds. Below, passengers stared out the windows at the impossible sight of two F-22 Raptors flanking a civilian airliner. Inside, the tension was palpable, a mixture of awe, fear, and confusion. And in the midst of it all, Maggie Hale remained calm, but her mind was anything but quiet. Her eyes, fixed on the horizon, flicked between instruments, windows, and the radio. Every instinct, every split-second calculation she had honed for decades, was firing at once. And yet, behind that calm exterior, memories she had buried for years began to surface. 16 years earlier, she had been a different person. Captain Margaret Hale, a tactical prodigy in the United States Air Force, had not merely flown missions, she had redefined them. At 26, she had been the youngest pilot in her squadron to earn command over classified intercept operations. Her simulations were legendary, her instincts unparalleled, and her ability to read the enemy's moves before they made them had saved lives on more than one occasion. But her career was never meant to last. She had been a woman in a man's world, brilliant but unorthodox, fearless but often insubordinate. During a classified crisis, she had taken control of a strike operation without authorization, an act that could have ended in disaster. But her decisions had saved dozens of lives. Dozens of lives that, officially, she was never credited for. Maggie had been erased from the system. Her accomplishments classified, her records sealed, her presence reduced to a whisper in Air Force archives. To the world, she had become a civilian. To those who had flown under her command, she had become a legend, spoken of in reverent tones during briefings and simulations, but never confirmed, never acknowledged publicly. And now, 16 years later, the world had found her again, at 35,000 feet, in Seat 16C, surrounded by civilians who had no idea of the storm about to unfold. The young Air Force lieutenant, seated a few rows behind Maggie, whispered to the man beside him, voice trembling, I think she's Eagle One. The simulations, the files, they all match." Maggie heard him but said nothing. She knew the truth would emerge soon enough, and her silence was intentional. The world might see her as a civilian now, but these pilots, these F-22s, recognized her authority instinctively. They trusted her decisions because they had once depended on her life to survive combat. The lead Raptor adjusted its formation, dipping slightly, a gesture of recognition, respect, and acknowledgement of the past. Maggie's fingers clenched the armrest. She could read the subtle movements as easily as she could read a tactical diagram. Every roll, every engine hum, every tilt of a wing carried a language only she understood. Her mind drifted back to that last mission, the one that had ended her career in the military's eyes. A strike group trapped behind enemy lines, communication cut off, resources dwindling. Conventional orders would have left them stranded, defenseless. Maggie had seized control, piloting her squadron through a labyrinth of anti-aircraft zones, radar traps, and hostile airspace. Every decision had been a gamble, every maneuver a calculated risk. She had saved the group, yes, but the cost had been personal. Her actions, though heroic, were unsanctioned, and the military had little tolerance for heroes who defied protocol, even when those actions prevented catastrophe. She had walked away, voluntarily erased from official records, and disappeared into civilian life. Yet now, the past had returned with a roar of engines and the precision of winged steel. The F-22 pilots didn't just know her name, they knew her reputation, her tactics, her instincts, and they were placing their trust in her once again. The captain, still pale, leaned toward her. "Ma'am, do you realize what this means? Those pilots, they trained for you. They've studied your simulations, your strategies, your every move." Maggie's lips pressed into a thin line. "I know." She glanced at the young lieutenant behind her. "And now they need me to live up to it." Her thoughts shifted to the passengers. Each one was a life she had not trained for, a scenario she had not simulated. Children clutched toys, adults stared in disbelief, and crew members whispered in confusion. Yet every life aboard was now intertwined with her legacy. A decision she made in the next few moments could ripple across lives, unseen but monumental. The radio crackled again, urgent now. "Eagle One, The airspace anomalies have intensified. Immediate tactical guidance required. Maggie's hand hovered near the cockpit window. She calculated angles, distances, relative velocities, all in an instant. She visualized potential maneuvers, each choice a delicate balance between civilian safety and tactical necessity. "The anomaly is approaching from the southeast," she said finally, voice calm but sharp. "Maintain altitude, adjust heading 2 degrees north, avoid abrupt maneuvers. They are testing our response, do not provoke engagement." Outside, the Raptors shifted in precise synchronization. Their engines hummed, responding to her directions as though she were still officially in command. The passengers, oblivious to the full magnitude, stared at the jet-black silhouettes slicing through clouds, reflecting sunlight in deadly precision. Maggie's mind replayed her training, her simulations, her victories and her losses. The tactical genius that had once earned her the call sign Eagle One was alive and ready. But this time, the stakes were higher. Civilian lives, innocent and untrained, were at risk, and the world outside these thin fuselage walls was watching her move once again. A brief wave of emotion passed over her, a mixture of fear, pride, and the weight of responsibility. She had been a civilian for 16 years, deliberately invisible, and now the world had found her, drawn her back into a role she thought she had left behind. The lead Raptor executed a slow, deliberate roll, a salute, a ceremonial gesture acknowledging her presence and authority. Maggie's eyes softened momentarily. Recognition, yes. Respect, yes. But the unspoken question lingered. Would she rise to meet it once more? The cabin remained tense. Passengers whispered among themselves, unaware of the legacy in their midst. A mother clutched her child tightly. A man took shaky photos. A flight attendant's hands trembled as she adjusted seatbelts. None could comprehend the full import of the scene. The most advanced fighter jets in the world, flanking a civilian airliner, guided by a woman who had once been erased from history but whose legend had never truly faded. The radio buzzed again, quiet but deliberate. Eagle One, maintain control and provide continuous assessment. Civilian safety is paramount. Tactical input required. Maggie exhaled slowly. The weight of her past, present, and potential future pressed down on her shoulders. She had been gone for years, but the world had never truly forgotten her. Her voice, when it emerged, was calm, measured, and commanding. All systems stable. Maintain formation. Approach vectors aligned. No sudden maneuvers. Civilian cabin secure. Continue observation. Outside, the Raptors adjusted, engines roaring in harmony with her assessment. The salute had been acknowledged, the recognition complete. And yet, Maggie knew the moment of reckoning had not passed. The anomalies in civilian airspace were only growing, and the F-22s had come to her not just for guidance, they had come for leadership. She leaned back in her seat, taking a brief, measured glance at the passengers. They were alive, oblivious to the storm of history and skill orbiting around them. And she felt the first stirrings of resolve. Her past might have been classified, her accomplishments erased, but her instincts were still sharp, her mind still clear, and her legacy unbroken. Because Maggie Hale, known to those who mattered as Eagle One, had returned to the skis. And history was about to be rewritten once more. The turbulence had intensified, subtle at first, then rolling in a violent rhythm that made the cabin tremble. Drinks sloshed dangerously over the edges of cups, the overhead bins rattled, and passengers gripped their seats with wide-eyed fear. Yet Maggie Hale remained unnervingly calm, her hands clasped lightly in her lap, eyes scanning the horizon as though she were studying a puzzle only she could see. The F-22 Raptors outside flanked the plane with precision, maintaining a protective formation. Their pilots were silent, waiting, observing, but the subtle shifts in their movements spoke volumes to someone trained to read them. "They're testing me, seeing if I still have the instincts." A crackle came over the radio. The voice was calm but urgent, tinged with respect. Eagle 1, your tactical input is required immediately. Civilian airliner stability compromised. Assessment and guidance needed. Maggie inhaled slowly, letting the weight of decades of experience settle into her body. This was not a simulation. This was not a controlled mission. This was real with real people at risk, and she alone held the knowledge to prevent disaster. She rose from her seat and walked to the cockpit, her movements precise, authoritative, unhesitating. Every step was measured, every motion deliberate. The captain turned, confusion and apprehension evident in his eyes. "Ma'am, are you sure you can?" "I'm sure," she interrupted, her voice low, firm, carrying a weight that silenced the cabin. "I've trained for this and more." She leaned against the cockpit window, eyes fixed on the display outside. A subtle change in the plane's pitch, an almost imperceptible shudder, told her more than any instrument could. The right engine was losing thrust symmetry, a minor problem now, but if uncorrected during descent, it could become catastrophic. The lead F-22 pilot called over the radio. "Eagle 1, confirm observation. We are prepared to adjust for anomalies." Maggie didn't hesitate. "Right engine asymmetry developing, minor but critical. Adjust throttle by 4%. Compensate with slight rudder correction. Maintain current altitude. Civilian cabin must remain stable." She paused for a heartbeat, her mind racing through contingencies. She had been in worse situations, combat zones, enemy fire, equipment failure, but never with so many civilians relying entirely on her decisions. Yet she remained calm, almost eerily so. The captain, now pale but trusting her implicitly, followed her instructions. "Throttle right, 4%, rudder slight." His voice shook, but he did as she commanded. Outside, the Raptors responded almost instantly, their movements fluid and precise, adjusting for the turbulence and providing the protective envelope that only jets of this caliber could offer. Maggie observed, calculating, predicting, reacting faster than anyone aboard could comprehend. One of the Raptors shifted, dipping slightly, a signal only she could interpret. Respect. Confirmation. They trusted her instincts even now, decades after her official career had ended. Maggie's gaze flicked to the passengers. Children were gripping toys, mothers whispered reassurances they did not feel, and adults stared in disbelief at the skis outside. None of them understood the gravity of the situation, but Maggie did. Every passenger, every ounce of fuel, every structural stress point of the plane was now a variable in her calculation. "Cabin is stable," she murmured to herself, "but exposure to turbulence is increasing." Another radio crackle. "Eagle 1, unidentified aerial anomalies detected on collision course with your airspace. Immediate assessment required." Her heart rate remained steady. Anomalies, she thought. Could be drones, could be a system test or something else. The F-22s were ready to engage if necessary, but the responsibility to avoid civilian casualties rested on her shoulders. She scanned the sky, noting subtle movements, angular trajectories, wind patterns, even sunlight reflections off distant clouds. "Vectors calculated," she said finally. "Shift flight path 3 degrees north, maintain altitude 35,000. Avoid aggressive maneuvers. They are testing response thresholds. Do not provoke engagement. Right engine asymmetry compensated. Cabin stability maintained." The captain nodded, executing her commands with a mixture of trust and fear. The plane shuddered slightly, but the adjustments were effective. Passengers remained oblivious to the danger, focused on the surreal sight of Raptors flanking their plane. Maggie's mind flashed to that final classified mission years ago, the one that ended her career. A strike group trapped behind enemy lines, no communication, dwindling resources. She had taken control then, as she did now, guiding pilots through impossible odds, calculating every move in milliseconds. She had survived because she trusted her instincts, and now, so did the pilots outside. Another radio crackle, voice tense but reverent. "Eagle 1, assessment confirmed. Tactical stability achieved. Civilian cabin remains secure. You have our acknowledgement. Maggie exhaled slowly. For a moment the weight lifted, but she knew better than anyone that calm in the sky was temporary. There was always another test, another anomaly, another unexpected threat. The Raptor pilots had not merely called her for guidance. They were watching her, testing her, ensuring she still deserved the legend. A sudden jolt rattled the plane. Minor turbulence, yes, but amplified by the precarious asymmetry she had corrected moments ago. Drinks spilled, passengers gasped, and a man yelled in panic. Maggie's hands went to the seat back in front of her, steadying herself, her gaze locked on the horizon. "Minor turbulence," she said, calm but audible. "Brace yourself, but we are stable. Engines compensated. Raptor coverage optimal." Outside, the Raptors executed a subtle maneuver, slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Maggie recognized it immediately. A salute, acknowledgement, and coordination. They were confirming her authority, validating her presence, and trusting her instinct over protocols. The cabin fell silent again, all eyes on her now. Maggie remained calm, the quiet epicenter of skill and authority. The young lieutenant whispered to the man beside him, barely audible, She's doing it. She's really doing it. She's Eagle One." The anomalies persisted. Faint radar blips, unknown aircraft shadows at extreme distance. Maggie analyzed, calculated, predicted. Every movement, every adjustment, every shift in wind or pressure was a variable she accounted for instantly. She directed the captain, her voice precise, unwavering. "Left wing drift minimal, adjust aileron slightly. Turbulence spike incoming, adjust pitch by 2 degrees. Cabin remains stable. Engage visual check outside for anomalies. Confirm intercept distance maintained by Raptors." Minutes passed, tense and silent, punctuated only by the crackle of radio communication and the hum of engines. Then, gradually, the turbulence eased. The Raptors relaxed their formation slightly, engines softening, their movements less rigid. The captain exhaled audibly. "Ma'am, you just controlled the situation I've never seen." Maggie raised a hand, cutting him off. "Not controlled," she said softly. "Assessed, adapted, survived. There is a difference." Outside, the lead Raptor executed a slow, deliberate roll, a salute, a ceremonial gesture acknowledging her authority. Maggie's eyes softened. Recognition, respect, and trust, earned decades ago, reaffirmed now. The passengers, still unaware of the full scope, cheered quietly, thinking the turbulence was over. Yet Maggie knew the truth. The skis were still a test. Every moment of calm was temporary, and every decision she had made, every maneuver she had directed, had proven she was still the pilot, the tactician, the legend known as Eagle One. The radio crackled one final time before the plane approached safer airspace. "Eagle One, tactical assessment complete. Civilian safety confirmed. You have our respect." Maggie sank back into her seat, a brief smile flickering across her face. The weight of responsibility eased, if only slightly. She had passed the test, guided the plane, maintained civilian safety, and reaffirmed her place among the pilots who had once depended on her life. But she knew the larger storm was not yet over. The world she had left behind, the past she thought buried, had found her again. And the next phase of this journey would demand more than skill. It would demand every ounce of courage, calculation, and legacy she possessed. Because in the skis above, history had returned, and Eagle One had proven she still belonged. The sky outside had begun to settle, a muted gradient of gray and blue stretching endlessly across the horizon. The F-22 Raptors maintained their protective formation, circling with a precision that seemed almost ritualistic. Inside the cabin, passengers cautiously relaxed, whispering to one another, sharing glances of awe and fear. Yet Maggie Hale remained vigilant, eyes darting to the windows, instruments, and the radio. The calm was deceptive. Her heart carried a faint but persistent thrum of tension. It wasn't just the turbulence, or the asymmetry she had corrected. It was the knowledge that the past, long buried, had returned in full force. The F-22 pilots were not here merely to escort or protect. They were here because they remembered her, not the civilian she had tried to become, but the Eagle One, the tactician who had disappeared from official records, leaving behind a legend that had haunted military corridors for over a decade. The radio crackled again, sharper this time. Eagle One, new directive, identification required, immediate response. Maggie froze. The voice carried more than protocol, it carried suspicion. Whoever was on the other end wanted to verify her identity. And verification in this situation wasn't just a formality. It was a recognition of her past, a past that could expose her civilian status and draw her back into conflicts she had spent years avoiding. She clenched her fists in her lap, lips pressing together. The passengers had no idea what was unfolding. They were unaware that the calm, ordinary-looking woman they had seen moments ago was being summoned into a confrontation that would demand every skill, every instinct, and every shred of courage she possessed. The captain, sensing her tension, leaned toward her. "Ma'am, what does this mean? Are they questioning you?" Maggie exhaled slowly. "Not questioning, verifying. They need to be sure." Her eyes scanned the sky, calculating distances, angles, and the subtle shifts in engine tones. If they don't get the confirmation they need, this could escalate. Outside, one of the Raptors adjusted its formation subtly, a probing maneuver, testing her response. Maggie recognized the pattern instantly. She spoke quietly into the radio, almost to herself. "They're watching for hesitation, for signs I'm no longer Eagle One." The F-22 pilots responded with deliberate slowness, maintaining distance yet remaining within sight. Each subtle adjustment of their formation was a test, a challenge to her legacy. Her mind flashed back to that mission years ago, the one that had ended her official career. She had been commanding a squadron trapped behind enemy lines, communications severed, resources almost depleted. Conventional orders would have left them stranded. She had seized control, guiding pilots through a labyrinth of anti-aircraft fire, radar traps, and hostile airspace. Every move had been a calculated risk. Every decision carried life-or-death consequences. She had succeeded, but at a cost. The success had been classified, erased from records, and her presence officially nullified. Her name, her call sign, her achievements, they had been buried in a tomb of secrecy. And now, the ghosts of that past were back, circling above, testing whether the woman who had been erased still existed. A young flight attendant passed by, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted seatbelts. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" Maggie's eyes softened briefly. "For them," she said, nodding toward the passengers. "They will be fine, but for me, this is not over." The radio crackled again, more urgently this time. "Eagle One, identity verification required. Protocol demands visual acknowledgement." Maggie's jaw tightened. She had trained for high-speed intercepts, tactical assessments, and enemy engagement. But this was different. This was a test of recognition, a moment that could undo the civilian life she had painstakingly built. She rose from her seat, moving toward the cockpit once again. Each step was measured, precise, carrying authority even in the midst of chaos. The passengers noticed her movement, but they could not comprehend its significance. The lead Raptor dipped slightly, a subtle maneuver known only to those who had trained alongside her. It was a test of identity, a silent question. "Are you still the Eagle One we knew?" Maggie's hand hovered near the cockpit window, then she pressed her palm against the glass. Her eyes flicked toward the jet, reading the subtle angles, the shifts in formation, the rhythm of the engines. Every movement spoke a language only she could decipher. "Yes," she whispered under her breath, "I am." The Raptors responded instantly, rolling in a precise salute. The engines hummed in perfect synchronization, the wings tilting in acknowledgement. Her verification had been accepted. Her past had recognized her presence. The cabin erupted in murmurs of confusion and awe. The passengers had no idea that they were witnessing a historic acknowledgement. A civilian woman confirmed as a living legend by two of the most advanced fighter jets in the world. Maggie's mind, however, remained focused. She knew this was only the beginning. The anomalies in civilian airspace were increasing. Unknown aircraft were detected at extreme distances, their patterns erratic and unpredictable. The Raptors were here, yes, but they were also constrained by rules of engagement that she alone could navigate effectively. She leaned into the cockpit window, eyes scanning, calculating, predicting. "Vectors for anomalies," she said, her voice calm, precise. "Adjust formation slightly north. Maintain altitude 35,000. Do not provoke engagement. Civilian cabin must remain stable." The captain, pale but trusting, executed her commands. The plane shuddered slightly, then stabilized. Maggie exhaled, but only briefly. The weight of responsibility remained, pressing down like gravity itself. Her thoughts drifted to the squadron she had once led, the pilots who had trusted her life above their own. Some had survived missions under her command, some had not. Every loss had been a lesson, every survival a testament to her skill. And now, the lives aboard this plane, innocent civilians, depended on that same skill, that same instinct. A sudden jolt rattled the fuselage. Minor turbulence, perhaps, but Maggie's instincts screamed otherwise. She quickly analyzed the situation, a rogue current intersecting with the plane's flight path, amplified by the asymmetry of external wind patterns. The Raptors adjusted immediately, wings tilting, engines humming in response to her mental calculations. "Brace for minor turbulence," she instructed, calm but commanding. "Cabin stability maintained, all systems nominal." Minutes passed in tense silence. Then the anomalies began to dissipate, fading into the horizon. The Raptors adjusted, relaxing their formation slightly, acknowledging her control. Maggie's hands, steady and poised, reflected a calm she had cultivated over years of high-pressure scenarios. The radio crackled one final time. "Eagle 1 verification complete. Tactical assessment confirmed. Civilian safety ensured. You have our respect." Maggie exhaled slowly, sinking back into her seat. The passengers, oblivious to the full scale of what had transpired, murmured quietly, exchanging glances and recording videos on their phones. They saw only a calm woman and two jets that had protected them. They did not know the story, the legend, that had just unfolded above the clouds. For Maggie Hale, the moment was bittersweet. The past had caught up to her, tested her, and acknowledged her. She had survived, guided the plane, and confirmed her identity to those who remembered her as Eagle 1. But she knew the larger challenge remained. Because the anomalies, the tests, the shadows of her past, they were not gone. They were only waiting for the next move, the next decision, the next moment where her instincts, her experience, and her courage would be demanded once again. And Maggie Hale, known once and forever as Eagle 1, understood that the sky above her was not a sanctuary. It was a proving ground. A ground where legends were recognized, legacies affirmed, and the shadows of the past returned to challenge the present. The sky darkened as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the fading light scattering through a tapestry of clouds. The F-22 Raptors flanking the plane cut sharp silhouettes against the shifting sky, their engines a low, menacing hum that resonated throughout the cabin. Inside, passengers were tense, their earlier awe now tinged with genuine fear as the plane shuddered slightly in the turbulence. Maggie Hale remained in her seat, her hands lightly resting on her knees, her gaze locked on the shifting horizon. But beneath her calm exterior, every nerve was alight with anticipation. This was no ordinary turbulence. A new set of anomalies had appeared on the radar, unidentified aircraft, moving erratically, intersecting the plane's path with increasing frequency. Some were close enough that the F-22 pilots had taken defensive stances, their wings tilting, engines humming with barely restrained power. Maggie could sense the tension in the formation. The Raptors were as precise as ever, but even they relied on her assessment. The radio crackled again, urgency thick in the voice. Eagle 1 anomalies closing rapidly. Civilian safety at risk. Immediate tactical input required. Maggie rose from her seat, her voice calm but firm. Adjust heading 3 degrees north. Maintain altitude. Keep the Raptors in formation. Do not engage unless provoked. Cabin must remain stable. The captain followed her instructions with a mixture of fear and awe. He had long since stopped questioning her. Every time she gave a command, the plane responded perfectly, as if her words carried the authority of experience, instinct, and history combined. Outside, the lead Raptor dipped slightly, almost imperceptibly, signaling acknowledgement and coordination. Maggie read it instantly, a sign that the pilots trusted her instincts, even under escalating threat. She leaned close to the cockpit window, eyes scanning the horizon. The anomalies were closing faster now, small blips against the fatting light, but their erratic patterns suggested intelligence, intent, and unpredictability. This wasn't random. It was calculated, controlled chaos. And Maggie understood immediately. If she miscalculated even slightly, the plane could be in catastrophic danger. Her mind raced through possibilities. At 35,000 feet, speed, wind patterns, and trajectory could become lethal if not managed perfectly. She calculated angles, velocities, and evasive maneuvers in milliseconds, mentally simulating every scenario. Then she issued the orders, crisp and deliberate. Throttle steady, minor pitch adjustment by 2 degrees, roll compensations to counter turbulence, maintain cabin stability, visual identification on all anomalies. Raptors, mirror my movements precisely. The Raptors shifted, engines roaring in tandem, their movements synchronized with her calculations. It was a deadly ballet in the clouds, each plane responding instantly to her commands. Passengers screamed as a sudden gust shook the cabin. Drinks spilled, phones rattled, and the young lieutenant whispered to the man beside him, voice trembling. "Is she really controlling all of this?" "Yes," the man replied, eyes wide. She's Eagle 1. Maggie didn't acknowledge them. She couldn't. Her entire focus was on the anomalies, the Raptors, the plane, and the lives of everyone aboard. A misstep now could cost dozens of innocent lives. The lead Raptor radioed, a note of admiration in the pilot's voice. "Eagle 1, anomalies responding to your directives. Civilian aircraft safe for the moment. Recommend continued guidance." She exhaled slowly but did not relax. "Not safe enough. They are testing response thresholds. Maintain formation. Evasive patterns ready." The plane shuddered again, more violently this time. The turbulence was amplified by the interaction of wind currents with the high-speed F-22s and the anomalies approaching from the southeast. Maggie's instincts kicked into overdrive. Engage slight ascent, 3 degrees. Compensate with rudder adjustments. Cabin stability is priority. The captain executed her commands. The plane responded almost flawlessly, though drinks sloshed over cups and passengers gripped armrests in panic. Maggie's calm voice, however, reassured them unknowingly. She was in complete control. Minutes stretched into tense eternity. The anomalies closed in, some accelerating unpredictably, others mirroring their own movements with uncanny precision. Maggie realized these weren't ordinary aircraft. They were probes, testing, calculating, challenging. And she understood the stakes. If they misjudged her, they would provoke an aggressive response from the Raptors. If she misjudged them, the plane could be torn apart. "Visual on southeast anomalies," she reported calmly. "They're intelligent, maneuvers unpredictable, maintain defensive posture. Raptors flank tightly. I'll guide the civilian aircraft through." The Raptors shifted instantly, responding to her mental calculations. Lead and wingman executed slight rolls, mirroring the plane's course with precise tolerance. The anomalies changed trajectory, adjusting to the plane's evasive patterns as if anticipating her moves. Maggie's eyes narrowed, calculations running faster than thought, faster than speech, faster than time itself. She issued one final set of instructions: throttle steady, minor pitch adjustments to counter turbulence. Raptors, maintain defensive envelope. Civilian cabin remain stable. Visual confirmation on all anomalies. Prepare for high-velocity evasive maneuvers if necessary. The plane surged through the sky, engines roaring, wings slicing through the air like a blade. Outside, the anomalies closed in closer. The Raptors danced around the civilian aircraft, shielding it, mirroring her maneuvers with deadly precision. In the cabin, passengers screamed as the plane tilted, rolled, and shifted with astonishing agility. Yet Maggie remained calm, her hands light on her knees, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Every calculation, every command, every movement was perfect. She was not just piloting the plane, she was orchestrating the entire aerial battlefield. The anomalies began to break formation, some accelerating away, others retreating. Maggie adjusted the plane slightly, her instincts unerring, her experience decades in the making. The Raptors mirrored her adjustments instantly. Anomalies dispersing, the lead pilot radioed, voice awash with relief. Civilian aircraft secure, your maneuvers were flawless. Maggie exhaled slowly, finally allowing herself a momentary relief. Maintain formation until we reach controlled airspace. Cabin stability paramount. The turbulence eased, the anomalies vanished into the horizon, and the Raptors gradually relaxed their aggressive formation. Passengers stared in awe, cameras capturing every moment, oblivious to the deadly intelligence behind every maneuver. The young lieutenant, pale and trembling, whispered again, She really is Eagle One. The legends were true." Maggie offered no response. She didn't need to. Her presence, her skill, and the flawless execution of every maneuver spoke louder than words ever could. For a fleeting moment, silence fell inside the cabin. Then the lead Raptor executed a final, deliberate roll, a salute ceremonial and precise. Maggie's eyes softened slightly. Respect, recognition, acknowledgement of a legend alive once again. Her hands relaxed, her mind still alert, scanning instruments, skis, and formation. The immediate danger had passed, but she knew this was only a momentary reprieve. The anomalies had tested her. The Raptors had verified her skill. Civilian lives had been protected by the precision of her instincts. And Maggie Hale, known forever as Eagle One, had not only survived, but commanded the skis with a mastery that no one aboard, civilian or military, could ever forget. Yet deep inside, she knew the final challenge remained. The world that had erased her, that had hidden her legend, was watching. The sky had tested her, yes, but the past she had thought buried, the enemies she had not yet faced, and the legacy she still carried would demand more from her before this flight truly ended. Because for Maggie Hale, Eagle One, survival had never been enough. She had to prevail. And the ultimate test was only just beginning. The horizon glowed with the last streaks of sunlight, painting the sky in gold, crimson, and deep violet. The turbulence had faded into a calm, almost serene hum, yet the weight of the past, present, and future pressed down on the cabin. Maggie Hale remained seated, eyes scanning instruments, the clouds outside, and the disciplined movements of the Raptors flanking their civilian charge. Every sense was heightened, every instinct alert. The anomalies had dissipated, yes, but the final test was not merely surviving the storm. It was about commanding respect, proving that she was still Eagle One, and ensuring that the lives in this plane were protected until they were safely on the ground. The young flight attendant leaned toward her, voice trembling, words barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, everyone, they're saying it's amazing. How did you do all that?" Maggie's gaze softened, but only briefly. She had no time for explanations yet. Her mind was still calculating. Wind currents, altitude adjustments, Raptor positions, and the final approach to controlled airspace. Every detail mattered. One mistake now could undo all the precision she had orchestrated. She rose from her seat and moved toward the cockpit window. Outside, the lead Raptor dipped slightly, a signal she recognized immediately. Respect, a salute, an acknowledgement that she had not only survived but commanded the situation flawlessly. She pressed her hand lightly against the glass, almost reflexively, and whispered under her breath, "I am here. I am Eagle One." The F-22 pilots responded instantly. They executed a coordinated roll, engines humming in perfect synchrony, wings slicing through the evening sky like a ceremonial dance. Maggie's lips curved slightly. It was more than a salute. It was history in motion, a recognition that transcended words, protocol, and decades of secrecy. The captain, now pale but fully trusting her, called over the radio, "Ma'am, your instructions, the passengers, you've saved them." Maggie didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Every adjustment of the plane, every calculated maneuver, every command she had given had ensured civilian safety. And the F-22's coordinated movements outside confirmed it. She had earned their recognition as a legend once again. Passengers, unaware of the full depth of her legacy, craned their necks at the spectacle outside. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, whispers rose. "Who is she?" one woman asked. "Why are they saluting her?" Maggie's eyes softened as she glanced at them. They would never truly understand, and perhaps they didn't need to. Her legacy wasn't for their recognition. It had been forged in skis that demanded perfection, trust, and courage beyond imagination. The young lieutenant, seated behind her, whispered to the man beside him, I think she's the real Eagle One. The simulations, the declassified files, it's her. She's alive." Maggie's lips curved faintly. The acknowledgement of her past by these pilots and the silent understanding in her mind was enough. She did not need the applause of civilians or the records of the Air Force. She had proven herself where it mattered most, in the air, in the face of danger, with lives in her hands. The lead Raptor executed another slow roll, a formal salute, ceremonial, precise. Maggie's gaze locked with the pilots as they mirrored her movements with absolute coordination. The hum of engines, the tilt of wings, the perfect synchronization. It was a dance of trust, a symphony of recognition. "Eagle One," the radio crackled, voice filled with reverence. "Civilian safety confirmed, tactical oversight flawless. You have our respect, always have." Maggie exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her shoulders, but the vigilance remained. She had survived the anomalies, commanded the Raptor pilots, and protected every life aboard. Yet deep down, she knew this was more than a mission. It was a reclamation of her legacy. She had been erased, classified, and forgotten in official records, but no one could erase her skill, her instinct, or the respect of those who had once followed her into impossible skis. The captain called one final time over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have cleared the anomalies. You are safe. And well, you just witnessed history, whether you know it or not." Passengers erupted in applause, a mix of relief and awe. They still didn't fully understand the extent of what had just unfolded, but they knew instinctively that the calm, ordinary-looking woman in seat 16C had done something extraordinary. Some took photos, some whispered prayers, and others simply stared out the windows at the fatting silhouettes of the Raptors. Maggie sank back into her seat, allowing herself a small, private smile. For the first time in 16 years, she felt the weight of her past lift, if only slightly. She had survived. She had protected lives, and she had reclaimed her place among the legends she had once commanded. The lead Raptor hovered for a brief, ceremonial moment, then peeled off, followed by its wingman. Maggie watched them disappear into the horizon, engines fading into the distance. The sky was quiet now, the anomalies gone, the danger past. But her legend had not vanished. The salute she had received, The recognition from those who knew her skill would remain with her forever. Eagle One was no longer just a call sign. It was a testament to courage, precision, and the unbreakable human spirit. The cabin erupted into relieved chatter. Some passengers turned to her, still unaware of the truth. A young boy, gripping his mother's hand, asked softly, "Ma'am, did you do all that?" Maggie's eyes met his. She smiled gently. "We all do what we must," she said softly, letting the words be both a lesson and reassurance. As the plane began its descent into controlled airspace, the captain glanced at her. "Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you. You saved everyone. His voice faltered, searching for words. Maggie only nodded, a quiet acknowledgement. She didn't need words. Her actions had spoken, and the sky itself had recognized her authority. Below, the city lights began to twinkle as the plane prepared to land. Outside, the wind shifted, clouds parted, and for a fleeting moment the world seemed to pause. And in that moment, Maggie Hale, civilian by law, legend by action, felt the culmination of years of sacrifice, skill, and courage. The Raptors returned briefly, flanking the plane one final time in a perfect formation. Then in unison they executed one last slow roll, a salute that was ceremonial, historic, and eternal. Maggie watched them disappear, knowing that the acknowledgement was not just for the mission. It was for her legacy, and for the countless lives she had impacted across the years. Inside the cabin, passengers began to understand in their own way that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The woman they had seen as ordinary had been anything but. She had been the calm at the center of chaos, the force guiding them through danger, the living embodiment of precision, courage, and instinct. And as the plane touched down safely, tires kissing the runway with the quiet dignity of survival and mastery, Maggie Hale allowed herself a moment of relief. She had reclaimed her legacy. She had proven that the call sign Eagle One was not just a name. It was a testament to what one person could accomplish in the face of unimaginable odds. The F-22s disappeared into the distance, but the salute, the recognition, and the legend remained. Maggie Hale had returned to the skis, and the world would remember her, not as a civilian, not as a forgotten pilot, but as Eagle One forever.